They say some wounds never heal, but what if the wound inside you is alive? Imagine a swelling on your leg growing bigger, darker, and finally bursting open, releasing something no one could believe, thick yellow fluid mixed with tiny shining pieces of silver. That's exactly what happened to a man living alone in the wild frontier. But this was no ordinary sickness. It was a secret buried deep beneath the earth, in a silver mine where greed killed more than just hope. Before we reveal the truth that could cost lives and topple empires, drop your location in the comments so we know who's joining this ride. If you crave stories that grip you and don't let go, smash that subscribe button now. The real story starts here. Stay with us, because once you start, you won't want to look away. It started as nothing more than a small bump. At first, I barely noticed it, just a slight swelling on the back of my right calf, something I could easily dismiss as a bruise or insect bite. I work outdoors, always have. For years, I'd been used to cuts, scrapes, and aches that come with living off the land. But this bump, it wasn't like any wound I'd ever had. It didn't fade or go away. It grew. Days passed, then weeks. The swelling stretched my skin, taut and shiny, yellowish in color, like a bruise turning into something else, something wrong. It was soft but firm underneath, as if something was moving inside, trying to break free. I told myself to tough it out. Pain was part of life out here, but the pain grew worse. Not the kind you can shake off, but a deep, aching burn that pulsed with every step I took. I'm no stranger to hardship. I've worked mines, harsh lands, cold nights alone. I know pain, and I know silence. Out here, miles from the nearest town, there's no one to run to. You take care of yourself, or you don't last. So I kept quiet, kept moving, hoping it would pass. But it didn't. By the time the swelling reached the size of a fist, I couldn't hide it anymore. The skin over the lump stretched so thin it was almost translucent, yellowish and angry looking. Sometimes, late at night, the pain would keep me awake. It felt like pressure was building inside, pushing and pulling in ways I couldn't understand. I was afraid to look, afraid to know. Then, one morning, it happened. The skin gave way. There was no warning, no dramatic burst or loud crack, just a sharp tearing like a slow rip, followed by a wet heat that soaked my pants. I looked down and froze. A thick, yellowish fluid oozed out, mixed with tiny glints of something metallic. It wasn't blood, not pus. It was something else, something unnatural. I scooped some of the fluid into a jar I found in the barn. The small fragments inside shimmered like polished silver, each one the same shape, perfectly formed as if crafted by hands. I stared in disbelief. Metal inside my leg? How's that possible? I thought back to my time in the mines years ago. Silver mines deep in the hills near Widow's Creek. Harsh work, long days, and rumors of strange illnesses creeping through the camps. I had left that life behind, or so I thought, but now it seemed the past had followed me home, buried inside my own flesh. I spent hours staring at that jar. The thick, yellowish fluid swirled slowly, the silver fragments catching the morning light and winking back at me like tiny secrets. Each fragment was no bigger than a grain of sand, yet somehow they looked deliberate, machined almost, instead of random shards, as if they had purpose. And all the while my leg throbbed, a dull, insistent reminder that whatever had happened wasn't over. I tried to convince myself it was just some strange infection. Maybe something got under the skin, caused an abscess, and these metal pieces were bits of shrapnel I didn't remember picking up. But deep down, I knew better. The uniformity, the shynite wasn't natural. It was crafted. Out here on my ranch, solitude had always been my companion, sometimes my only one. But that morning, for the first time in years, I wished someone else was here. Someone who could tell me what in God's name was happening. Instead, all I had were my own memories, and those memories kept dragging me back to Silver Peak. It had been over a decade since I worked those mines. I remember the darkness, the damp air that stuck to your lungs, and the way the rocks seemed to whisper secrets if you listened too long. We were chasing veins of silver so pure they shimmered even in the dull lantern light. and the company meant they watched us closer than hawks, counting every scrap we brought up. They treated the ore like treasure, worth more than any man's life. Sometimes at night we'd hear rumors. Men who'd found strange growths under their skin, lumps that wouldn't heal, wounds that oozed silver dust. They vanished soon after sent away for treatment, the foreman said, but none of us ever saw them again. I tried to forget those stories. I told myself they were just miners' tales, spun in the dark to pass the hours. But now, looking at the jar in my hand, I realized those stories were warnings. Warnings I had ignored. The days after the rupture blurred together. The wound refused to close, leaking more of that sickly fluid mixed with silver dust. My leg burned hot, feverish, and I felt weaker each morning. But mixed with the fear was a strange sense of relief. The pressure had lessened, and for the first time in months, I could move without feeling like my skin might split again. Yet what troubled me more than the pain was the pattern. When the fragments dripped onto the dirt floor of the barn, they didn't scatter randomly. Instead, they clustered together, tiny specks aligning like iron filings drawn by a magnet. It was as if something unseen wanted them to reunite. I swept them up and hid them. Something told me not to leave them lying where anyone could see. I might live alone, but news travels fast in these parts, and there were things about Silver Peak the company wouldn't want uncovered. Every night, lying awake with my leg throbbing, I thought of the men I'd known in those tunnels, faces blurred by time, but memories sharp as broken glass. The coughs that wouldn't stop, the haunted eyes, the whispered fears of being harvested. We never understood what that meant. But now, staring at the silver in my own blood, I began to see. They weren't just mining silver from rock, they were mining it from us. The realization struck me cold. My memories, my body both carried scars from that place. And now, after all these years, the mine still owned a piece of me, literally. I knew I had to find answers, but I also knew the danger. The company had always been ruthless, guarding their secrets with iron and lead. If they found out I was leaking silver, they wouldn't let me keep walking free. But what choice did I have? Whatever was inside me had to come from that mine, and if it had happened to others, there might still be men suffering in silence, waiting for help that would never come. One morning, as the sun burned off the fog over the pasture, I decided I couldn't hide anymore. The jar, the fragments, and my memories, they were evidence. Proof of something monstrous. And even if it cost me everything, I had to know the truth. That was the day I saddled my horse and turned back toward the mountains, toward Silver Peak. The trail to Silver Peak hadn't changed much in the years since I'd last ridden it. The same jagged ridges clawed at the sky, the same dry wind carried dust and memories alike. But this time, every step of my horse's hooves seemed to echo louder, as if the mountains themselves remembered me and were warning me away. My leg burned under the bandage, a dull heat that pulsed with each heartbeat. At night, when the world fell silent, I could swear I felt something shifting inside, as if the fragments hadn't finished their work. But I pressed on, driven by a need I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was guilt for ignoring the signs all those years ago. Maybe it was fear, that if I did nothing, I'd end up buried in an unmarked grave, my body stripped for silver like the men who disappeared before me. The closer I got to the mine, the more the land seemed to change. The air felt heavier, the ground littered with scraps of rusted equipment and broken dreams. Here and there, I saw abandoned shacks collapsing under the weight of years and silence. Yet despite the ruin, fresh tracks cut through the dust hoof prints, wagon ruts, and something else, heavy boot marks that spoke of men who had business here, men who weren't afraid to return. When I finally reached the outskirts of Silver Peak, I kept my distance. From a rise above the old camp, I could see the scars the mine had carved into the earth. What struck me cold was the sight of new timbers reinforcing collapsed tunnels and smoke curling lazily from the chimney of the old foreman's shack. The mine was supposed to be sealed, left to rot under official orders after the so-called accidents. But it wasn't abandoned, it was alive. The realization clawed at my chest. Someone had reopened Silver Peak, and they were working it quietly, secretly, far from prying eyes. That night, I made camp a mile from the site, my horse tied among the scrub where no lantern light could reveal us. Sleep came in broken fragments, haunted by the memory of silver-laced fluid oozing from my leg and the terrified whispers of men I once worked beside. At dawn, I crept closer. From behind a line of boulders, I saw them, a handful of workers, faces hidden by scarves, hauling crates toward wagons. They moved with urgency, but not panic-like men following orders, not running from danger. Near the entrance, two guards stood with rifles slung over their shoulders, their eyes scanning the slopes above. Not local men, I could tell, hired muscle. Then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. A man, thin and hunched, was led from one of the side tunnels by two guards. His walk was unsteady, and his shirt clung to his back with sweat. Even from a distance, I recognized the gait, the stiff, pained steps of someone trying to hide a wound. And when he stumbled, the guards grabbed him roughly, pulling him upright like a sack of grain. I couldn't see his face, but I saw the stain on his trousers, dark and wet at the calf. It was the same as mine. He was leaking silver. They were still doing it, still forcing men to work until the metal tore through flesh, then harvesting what formed inside them. The rumors we'd shared in terrified whispers had been true all along. And now, years later, the mine had returned to its old business, quietly bleeding men dry for profit. The sight sickened me, but it also lit a fire in my chest. I had evidence in my saddlebags, the jar, with fragments from my own leg, and now I had seen it happening again. But who would believe me? The company had buried the truth once. They could do it again. Yet as I watched, another memory rose, faces of the men who vanished, who never got to tell their stories. And I realized that silence had been the company's strongest weapon all along. Fear kept us quiet, and the dead could not speak, but I was still alive. That night, under a cold sky littered with stars, I made my decision. I would gather more proof, find anyone willing to help, and drag the truth into the light, even if it cost me everything. For the first time in years, I felt something stronger than fear, resolve. And so, with dawn breaking over the peaks, I turned my horse back toward town, carrying in my saddlebags both my wound and my burden. I didn't yet know it, but what lay ahead would test every ounce of strength and force me to confront not just the company's greed, but the darkness inside myself as well. Riding back toward town felt like crossing an invisible line. For years I had chosen distance over danger, silence over truth. But now the silence itself felt poisonous. Each step of my horse's hooves on the rocky trail echoed a promise I made to myself. I wouldn't let what happened in that mine remain buried. I arrived in town near dusk, the air heavy with wood smoke and the faint tang of iron from the blacksmith's forge. It had been years since I'd walked those dusty streets, and though the storefronts were the same weathered timber and peeling paint, they seemed smaller somehow, like stage props hiding darker truths behind their facades. People noticed me limping, their eyes lingering on the bandage peeking from beneath my trouser leg, but no one asked questions. In places like this, curiosity could get you killed, and folks had long learned to mind their own business. Yet the weight of what I carried, the jar hidden deep in my saddlebags, felt heavier than any gaze. At the corner of Main and Willow stood a weather-beaten building with a sagging sign that read, Ward, Daughter, Physicians and Surgeons. I had met Dr. Ward once, years ago, when fever nearly took me. He'd saved my life back then, and I prayed he could help me now. Pushing open the door, the bell overhead rattled weakly, announcing my presence. Inside smelled of alcohol and dried herbs. Dr. Ward looked older than I remembered, his shoulders stooped, spectacles perched on his nose. His daughter Clementine, if memory serves, stood by a shelf of glass jars, her steady gaze turning to me the moment I entered. He asked what brought me in, and I found the words spilling out faster than I meant. About the swelling, the rupture, the fragments, and about what I'd seen at Silver Peak. Dr. Ward listened, silent but intent, his eyes darkening as I spoke. When I finished, he He asked to see the jar. His hands trembled slightly as he held it up to the lamplight, the silver fragments catching the glow. His daughter stepped closer, curiosity sharpening her expression. "These aren't random mineral inclusions," Dr. Ward muttered, more to himself than to me. "They're uniform, too perfect. And you say you saw another man, someone else with the same signs?" Clementine asked. Her voice was calm, but I caught a tremor beneath the words, a spark of fear, maybe, or something like anger. I nodded. "They're still working that mine, still forcing men to bleed silver." Silence settled thick between us. Then Dr. Ward spoke, voice grave. "If what you say is true, this isn't an illness. It's an engineered affliction. And if the company learns you've survived and worse, that you're talking, they won't let you walk free." I knew that already. Fear had followed me every mile back from those hills, but saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Clementine leaned forward, meeting my eyes. "What do you want to do next?" The answer came without hesitation. "Expose them. Find proof no court or company lawyer can bury." Dr. Ward hesitated, then set the jar carefully on the table. "Then you'll need allies and more evidence than a single jar." That night I stayed in a room above the clinic. Sleep didn't come easy. Each time I drifted close, pain from my leg would pull me back, along with memories of dark tunnels and the quiet dread that had settled over the men who'd vanished. Faces I hadn't thought of in years rose unbidden, their eyes hollow with questions that had never been answered. At dawn, Clementine knocked gently and brought me coffee. She didn't speak at first, just watched me wrap fresh bandages around my leg. Then softly, "My father and I can help, but you'll need to do more than talk. If the company's been hiding this, there must be record sledges, reports, something." I thought the same, I admitted. "But the mine's crawling with guards." "Then we start elsewhere," she said. "Old company offices, abandoned outposts, places they might have forgotten to clean. And if we find proof, we go public." Her resolve surprised me, but it also sparked something inside me. For so long, I'd believed no one would stand beside me against men with money and guns. Yet here she was, offering help not because she had to, but because she chose to. Later that morning, Dr. Ward handed me a sealed envelope. "In case something happens to you," he said quietly. "Inside are my notes and a sample from the jar. It will go to the Territorial Medical Board if you don't return." I nodded, the weight of it settling heavy in my coat pocket. I wasn't alone anymore, but the road ahead would be longer, darker, and more dangerous than I'd dared imagine. And so, with Clementine at my side and the past clawing at my heels, I stepped back into a fight I hadn't even known I'd been running from all these years. The morning after that talk felt different from any dawn I'd lived through in years. For the first time, I wasn't waking to hide what was happening to me, but to fight back. And not alone. Clementine's presence was a quiet anchor. Her resolve steadied mine. We both knew what we were stepping into, yet neither of us turned away. We began at the edges, where the company's presence had once been strong but had since withered. An old assay office on the outskirts of town still bore the company's faded emblem above the doorway, crossed hammers over a silver vein. The windows were shattered, and dust lay thick on the floorboards, but the lock on the filing cabinet had rusted away. Clementine and I spent hours sifting through brittle papers, coughing at the mold that rose with every turned page. Most of what we found were routine ledger payroll sheets or shipment tallies, but buried deep in a drawer, under rotting canvas bags, was a thin leather-bound log marked medical incidents. The handwriting inside was hurried, blotched with sweat or spilled ink, but legible enough. Each entry listed a miner's name, a date, and a brief clinical note. Subcutaneous growth noted. Silver-laced discharge. Transfer recommended. Dozens of names, including some I remembered from whispered campfire rumorsmen who'd disappeared, their absence explained away as desertion or drunken accidents. At the bottom of one page, a scrawl caught my eye. Specimens to be delivered to central office under special transport. Do not discuss. My chest tightened as I read it aloud to Clementine. Proof. Not just rumor, but a record that the company had known what was happening and had tried to profit from it. Clementine carefully wrapped the log in oilcloth. "This changes everything," she whispered. But we both knew it wasn't enough on its own. A single book could be dismissed, claimed as a forgery. We needed something undeniable. We pressed on, following paper trails from one forgotten building to the next. The further we dug, the darker the picture became. Another ledger, hidden under a loose floorboard in the old bunkhouse, listed shipments not of ore, but of organic silver deposits. Beside each entry was an amount paid, sums large enough to turn any honest man's head. And then a name I recognized, my own, scribbled years ago, alongside a date that matched my last week in the mine. Subject 27. Initial exposure confirmed. Monitor for growth. My breath caught. They had known, even back then. The swelling that had started small wasn't just an accident, it was part of a plan. All those years living free on my ranch, believing I'd left the mine behind yet in dusty ledgers, my name had remained, like a hook sunk deep in my flesh. I felt fury rise, hot and sudden, but Clementine's hand on my arm steadied me. "We're not done," she said softly. "There's more to find." We kept searching until the light outside turned red and long shadows stretched across the empty rooms. In an old safe behind a false wall, in what had once been the foreman's office, we found our last and most damning discovery. Letters exchanged between company executives. They spoke plainly of harvesting operations, of miners cultivated for silver yield, and of payouts to silence families when their sons failed to come home. Reading those words, the pieces fell into place. The company had seeded the miners' bodies, knowing the silver-rich ore would embed in flesh. They had tracked the growths, waited until they matured, and then extracted them, indifferent to the agony it caused or the lives it ended. And they had hidden it all behind claims of industrial accidents and desertion. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavier than any stone I'd hauled from those tunnels. But at the same time, I felt something shift inside, a hardening of purpose. The truth was monstrous, but now it was ours to carry forward. As we left the office, Clementine wrapped the letters in cloth and tucked them against her chest. Outside, the wind had picked up, swirling dust through the empty streets. In the gathering dusk, the town felt haunted by the memories of men whose bones lay unmarked, claimed by greed. We returned to Dr. Ward's clinic under the cover of darkness, moving carefully, listening for the crunch of boots on gravel or the creak of saddle leather. The company had watchers everywhere, and discovery now could mean more than arrest. It could mean we'd vanish like the men before us. Inside, Dr. Ward's face paled as we laid the documents before him. He read in silence, his shoulders slumping under the horror each page revealed. "My God," he murmured, "they've turned human life into a vein to be mined." His voice trembled, but when he looked up, his eyes were resolute. "This must go beyond us. The medical board, the territorial governor, everyone." In that moment, standing in the lamplight with dust on our coats and the truth heavy in our hands, I realized something simple yet profound. Silence had kept this evil alive. But if we spoke loudly enough, and if we stood together, it might finally end. The morning we planned to leave town with our evidence, I woke to an uneasy quiet. Outside the window, the street lay empty, the usual clatter of wagon wheels and traders absent. It felt like the hush that settles over a field before a storm breaks, a silence that listens for footsteps. Clementine and I packed the ledgers and letters into oilskin, tying them tight so they'd survive a journey over rough roads. Dr. Ward prepared his own notes, his handwriting tight and hurried. His face, lined by years and fatigue, looked older than ever, but his eyes still held the same determined glint I'd seen when he first examined my leg. Before we could step outside, a shadow passed across the window. I moved to the side, peering through the crack in the shutters. 6 riders had come into town, their coats marked with the company's crest, rifles strapped to their saddles. They weren't miners, they sat too straight in their saddles, and their eyes swept the street like men hunting something or someone. They know, I muttered, the words tasting like iron. Or, they suspect. Dr. Ward's mouth tightened. We don't have time to wait them out. If they find these documents, this all ends here. I nodded. Then we leave now, quietly. We slipped out the back door into the narrow alley behind the clinic. The cold morning air smelled of ash and horse sweat. Clementine carried the satchel under her coat. I kept a hand on the pistol tucked into my belt. I didn't want to use it, but I knew today might force my hand. We made it halfway across town before our luck ran thin. One of the riders caught sight of us, his gaze lingering too long on the bulge under Clementine's coat. His shout brought the others around, boots thudding on packed dirt, hands going to rifles. Don't run, I whispered to her, though my pulse hammered in my throat. Walk steady. But the men closed the distance fast, like wolves around a wounded deer. The leader, a hard-eyed man with a scar across his chin, reined in his horse to block our path. His voice was calm, but each word cut like a knife. You folks wouldn't happen to be carrying anything belonging to the company, would you? Clementine met his gaze, her back straight, chin lifted. All we have belongs to us. He looked past her, right at me. Funny thing about silver, he drawled. It doesn't stay where it should, and neither do secrets. His hand moved toward his rifle. Reflex took over. I stepped in front of Clementine, drawing my pistol. The alley seemed to narrow, the space between us thick with the promise of violence. But before blood could spill, Dr. Ward's voice cut through the tension. Enough! This town knows you, he said, stepping from a side doorway, hands raised. Do you mean to murder your own neighbors in daylight? For a moment the riders hesitated. The doctor's reputation carried weight. Even company men understood a line when they saw one. But the scarred man's eyes flickered with something darker, calculation. You'll hand over what you found, he said, or folks will get hurt. I forced myself to keep breathing. Fear clawed at my insides, but anger steadied my hand. Then you'd better be ready to do it in front of witnesses, I growled. The words hung in the air, brittle as old glass. Behind us, townspeople had gathered, merchants, stable boys, even an old woman from the bakery, drawn by the commotion, dozens of eyes watching. And in those eyes, I saw something unexpected, defiance. The scarred man saw it too. His jaw tightened. This isn't over, he hissed. Then he jerked the reins, turning his horse away. One by one, the other riders followed, though they cast glances back over their shoulders, promises of trouble to come. As they rode off, the crowd parted, murmuring low. Clementine exhaled, the breath she'd been holding coming out shaky. Dr. Ward's hands trembled slightly as he lowered them. We need to go, he urged, before they returned with reinforcements. We made for the edge of town, my limp slowing us but not stopping us. At the livery stable, our horses waited, saddled and ready. Dr. Ward's old mare, Clementine's bay gelding, and my own trail-worn roan. Clementine handed me the satchel, the weight of the truth inside it grounding me. You keep it, she said quietly. They'll come after me first. You're less expected. Part of me wanted to refuse, to keep her out of it, but I saw she wouldn't back down. So I nodded, slinging the satchel across my chest, the leather cool against my shirt. As we rode out, the sun climbed higher, spilling light over the valley. I couldn't shake the sense that each hoofbeat carried us deeper into danger, but also closer to justice. The evidence we carried had power enough to bring a company to its knees, if we could live long enough to deliver it. I glanced back once, seeing the town shrink behind us, the dust of the riders still lingering like a promise of pursuit. Ahead lay rough country, ambushes, and men paid to silence the truth. But for the first time, I wasn't riding away from my past. I was riding towards something. The road west of town twisted through dry hills and rocky gullies, the ground scarred by old mining trails and the bleached bones of abandoned camps. With each mile, the world seemed to grow wilder, and so did the threat following close behind. We didn't ride hard at first. Running would only prove we had something worth chasing. Instead, we kept to a steady pace, eyes on the trail and ears tuned for hoofbeats. But by midday we saw them. 5 riders, black silhouettes cresting a ridge behind us, moving with the slow patience of men who knew we couldn't outrun them forever. "They won't strike until dusk," I muttered, the words tasting of dust. "They'll wait for shadows." Clementine didn't flinch. "Then we make our stand before they choose the ground." We turned off the main trail, leading our horses down a narrow wash cut by flash floods. The ground was treacherous, littered with sharp stones, but it offered cover and it led to an old mining shack I remembered from years back, half collapsed but still standing enough to block bullets. By the time we reached it, sweat traced lines through the dust on my face, and my leg burned with every step. Clementine helped me down, her hand steady despite the tension in her jaw. Inside, the shack smelled of dry rot and rust. Sunlight stabbed through gaps in the warped boards, painting thin stripes of gold across the dirt floor. We tethered the horses in the shadows behind the structure, then ducked inside, our breath ragged. I checked my revolver, 4 rounds left. Clementine had a small pistol of her own, hardly more than a pocket gun, but her grip was sure. The satchel lay between us, its leather scarred and dusty. But inside, the truth weighted ledgers, letters, and the names of the dead. The riders drew closer. Dust rose from the trail behind them, a low rising cloud that caught the afternoon light. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat a drum counting down the moments before the storm broke. "You don't have to stay," I rasped, my throat dry. "They're after me." Her eyes flashed, sharp as broken glass. "They're after the truth, and that belongs to both of us." A silence settled then, not of fear, but of shared resolve. In that moment, the weight I'd carried alone for so many years felt lighter, split across 2 hearts. The first rider appeared at the mouth of the wash, his silhouette framed against the fading sky. Then another. They came slowly, rifles ready, eyes scanning the rocks. They hadn't come to negotiate. My mouth tasted of copper as I lifted my revolver, thumb resting on the hammer. Clementine crouched beside a broken beam, her pistol held close to her chest. They dismounted, spreading out among the rocks, 5 shadows against stone, moving with the patience of men who'd hunted before. The wind stirred the dust at our feet, whispering through broken boards. Then a voice, calm and cold, "Give us the bag, and we'll let you live." I swallowed, my voice hoarse. "If that were true, you wouldn't have brought rifles." No answer, cameonly the soft scrape of boots on gravel, the tightening of an unseen noose. The first shot cracked the silence, splintering a beam inches from my head. I ducked, firing back blind, the recoil punching through my shoulder. Clementine fired, her shot striking sparks from a rock. Dust swirled around us, and in that moment, the world shrank to breath, heartbeat, and the smell of powder. Another shot slammed into the shack wall, punching through rotten timber. Shards flew, stinging my face. I tasted blood, but it barely registered. Through the haze, I saw one rider step from cover, rifle raised. My second shot caught him high in the chest, spinning him backward. He fell hard, dust billowing around him. The others paused, surprise slowing them. Clementine used that heartbeat of hesitation, her small pistol coughing once, twice. A bullet ricocheted, grazing another man's arm. He cursed, ducking behind a boulder. But there were still too many. My leg throbbed, each heartbeat sending fresh pain through the wound that had started it all. The satchel lay heavy at my side, a promise, a curse, and a reason to keep breathing. I forced myself to focus. 1 shot left. I waited, breath shallow, as a figure slipped closer through the dust. Closer, closer. I fired. The revolver kicked in my hand, and the figure dropped with a strangled sound. Silence, thick as smoke, settled. Only the wind moved, stirring dust and whispers among the stones. Then another voice, lower, angrier. "They're just 2. Finish it." Boots scraped rock. Shadows moved, but before they could close, another sound rose, hooves, hard and fast, coming from beyond the ridge. Through the haze, I saw riders crest the hill townsfolk, A handful of men and women on tired horses, led by Dr. Ward. In his hand, he held a rifle awkwardly, but with the resolve of a man who'd chosen sides. The company men hesitated. They were outnumbered now, not by trained guns, but by people willing to stand. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Dust swirled between us like a living thing. Then the company men turned, dragging their wounded with them, retreating up the wash and over the ridge. Their threat hadn't ended, but for that moment, we'd forced them back. I let out a shaky breath, my arm aching, sweat cooling on my skin. Clementine lowered her pistol, her hand trembling only after the danger had passed. Dr. Ward dismounted, crossing the broken ground to stand beside us. His voice was soft but firm. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever happens next, we face it together." The words settled into me, as real as the dust underfoot and the blood on my knuckles. For the first time, truly, I believed them. After the gunfire faded, an aching quiet settled over the canyon. Dust hung in the late afternoon light, turning everything the color of old parchment. My pulse still hammered, my arm burned from the recoil, and the smell of spent powder clung to my clothes like regret. Dr. Ward and the townsfolk dismounted carefully, scanning the rocks for any sign the company men might return. Clementine's hand, still gripping her empty pistol, trembled slightly. She let it fall to her side, her breath ragged but steady. "We bought a little time," Dr. Ward said, voice low, eyes tracing the ridge. "Not much. They'll be back, and next time with more men." The words settled heavy on my chest, as real as the satchel still strapped across me. The ledgers inside felt like both shield and shackle-proof of a crime, but also a target painted on our backs. I checked my revolver, empty. My hands shook as I reloaded, each bullet a small mercy against the dark tide gathering beyond the hills. One of the townsmen, an older rancher named Willard, stepped closer, face grim. "We heard what they said," he rasped, "about company property, about harvesting men like cattle. You reckon it's true?" I met his gaze. "It's true. I've seen what comes out of a man's flesh, and I've read the papers they hid. They killed to keep it quiet, and they'll keep killing if they're not stopped." The rancher's jaw worked, anger tightening his weathered face. "Then what's our play?" Dr. Ward spoke before I could answer. "We take the evidence to the territorial court in Red Bluff. It's the closest town beyond the company's immediate reach. Once the judge sees what we have, he can order an official investigation. And if we never get there," someone muttered from the back. I swallowed. That fear had already gnawed at me. The long road ahead, each mile an ambush waiting to happen. My leg ached deep in the bone, reminding me of my own frailty. But the alternative, staying silent, letting the dead stay buried, felt worse. "We ride at first light," I said, my voice rough. We split into two groups. One carries the satchel, the other draws the company's eye. They can't catch us both. Clementine stepped forward, chin lifted. "I'll take the decoy," she offered, the words quick, certain. "No," I said too fast. My throat tightened at the thought of her out there alone. "You stay with the evidence. They know me. They'll chase me harder." Her eyes searched mine, a flicker of protest rising but dying just as quickly. She understood what I didn't say. They'd chase me first because they thought I was expendable. That night we camped near a dry creek bed, the dying coals of our fire painting our faces in flickering red. The desert cold crept in, sharp and merciless. Above us the stars stared down, ancient and indifferent. I lay awake, the satchel close to my chest, its weight a constant presence. My mind kept drifting back to the first day the swelling on my leg had burst, how the pain had felt like punishment, how the silver pieces had glinted in the dawn light, silent witnesses to something older and darker than greed alone. Dr. Ward spoke softly across the dying fire. "You still think about the other miners, don't you? The 17 who didn't live to speak." I nodded. "I see their faces in my dreams. I see the silver, the sickness and the men who decided it was worth more than a life. His gaze met mine, tired but resolute. Then let their silence push you forward. We do this for them too. Clementine lay wrapped in her blanket, but her eyes were open, reflecting the stars. Tomorrow changes everything, she whispered. Or ends it, I whispered back. She shook her head just once. Ends it for them, not for us. The wind stirred the ashes, and the fire died to embers. In the hush that followed, my mind drifted backward, to the clang of pickaxes in the dark mines, to the taste of grit on my tongue, to the moment I signed the contract that would haunt me years later. We had all thought we were just trading sweat for silver. None of us knew the price would be paid in blood. Dawn came gray and cold. We packed quickly, the sky bruised with the promise of another scorching day. Willard and two others volunteered to ride south, drawing the company's eye. Clementine and Dr. Ward stayed with me, the satchel secured under my coat. Before we parted, Willard gripped my hand, his calloused fingers strong. Ride fast, he said simply, and don't look back. As they rode off, the dust swallowed them, leaving us alone on the narrow trail that wound toward Red Bluff. Each hoofbeat felt like a prayer quiet, desperate and stubbornly hopeful. The road curved into the hills, shadows pooling in gullies where danger could wait unseen. My leg burned with each stride, but I forced the pain down, focusing on the rise and fall of Clementine's breathing beside me. For the first time, I realized that survival wasn't enough anymore. Telling the truth, living to see it heard had become the only thing that mattered. The wind carried grit against my skin, stinging like old guilt, but the weight on my chest felt lighter now, not because the danger had passed, but because it was shared. And in that fragile hope, we rode on. The trail to Red Bluff stretched ahead like a cruel promise, winding through jagged ridges and sparse forests where shadows crept close at dusk. Each mile was a challenge, my leg burning sharp with every step, the weight of the satchel pressing into my ribs like a second heartbeat. The sun hammered down mercilessly, turning the dust into choking clouds that clung to our faces and clothes. Clementine rode beside me, silent except for the occasional murmur of encouragement. Her eyes, sharp and watchful, scanned the horizon constantly. Dr. Ward rode a little behind us, his old mare struggling with the uneven terrain, but steady nonetheless. For hours, the road was empty. The quiet grew heavy, pressing in from all sides like a living thing. Then, just as the sun dipped low and painted the sky blood red, the distant sound came a soft, rhythmic pounding, barely audible at first, but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. We're being followed, Clementine said, voice low but steady. I tensed, gripping the reins tighter, my revolver lying useless in the saddlebag. The company men were patient predators. They'd been chasing us all this way, waiting for the right moment. The trail ahead forked, splitting into two narrow paths. Without hesitation, Clementine pointed left a sharper, rockier route known to few. This way, it's harder, but they won't expect it. I nodded, even though my legs screamed with every jarring step. The satchel bounced heavily against my side, reminding me of the truth we carried, proof that could topple an empire built on greed and death. As we plunged down the rocky path, the hoofbeats behind us multiplied. Shadows slipped between the trees, silhouettes growing closer with every heartbeat. I felt the weight of history pressing down. Miners lost to sickness, to secrets buried in blood, to a company that would stop at nothing. Suddenly, a shout broke the tense silence behind us. I turned briefly, catching a glimpse of a man on horseback, a figure, dark against the dying light, raising his rifle. "Take cover!" I yelled, dropping low as the first shot cracked through the air. The bullet tore through a nearby tree, splinters flying. Clementine spurred her horse, veering sharply around a boulder, while Dr. Ward urged his mare forward, wincing as a bullet grazed the animal's flank. The chase became chaos, horses thundering over rocks, men shouting, rifles blazing. The forest echoed with gunfire and the cries of terrified animals. My leg throbbed fiercely, but the adrenaline drowned out the pain. I fired blindly, the revolver bucking in my grip, aiming for the muzzle flashes darting between the trees. Amid the frenzy, a sharp crack echoed from above. I looked up just in time to see a falling branch slam toward Clementine's horse. She cried out, twisting in the saddle to avoid it, but the animal stumbled violently, throwing her hard to the ground. "Clementine!" I screamed, pulling my horse to a stop despite the pain. She hit the dirt hard, wind knocked out of her lungs, but her eyes flashed defiance. I dismounted quickly, checking her over. Bruises bloomed across her side, but no broken bones, thank God. "We need to keep moving," she gasped, pushing herself up. Before I could respond, the riders circled us, tightening like wolves. The leader, the scarred man from before, reined in, eyes cold and cruel. "Hand over the satchel, and you might live through this," he snarled. I swallowed, the weight of the moment pressing down. The truth was our sand, their sand. I would never surrender it. With a sudden surge, I aimed and fired. The bullet struck the leader's horse, which reared and threw him violently to the ground. The others hesitated, confusion flashing across their faces. Seizing the moment, Dr. Ward yelled, "Now, run!" We scrambled back onto our horses, Clementine wincing but steady. The horses surged forward, pounding away through the trees, the company men scrambling after us in furious pursuit. Branches whipped at our faces, rocks threatened to trip our mounts, and every breath tasted like dust and danger. As the sun slipped behind the ridges, casting long shadows over the land, I knew this was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a war to expose the darkest truths buried deep in the silver mine sand, a test of how far we were willing to go for justice. The journey to Red Bluff was dusty and tiring. Every mile felt like a race against time. My leg hurt with each step of the horse, reminding me of how close I was to losing everything. Clementine rode quietly next to me, focused and alert. Dr. Ward's horse was getting slower, tired from the ride, but we kept going. Behind us, the sound of horses kept coming closer. When the town finally appeared on the horizon, I felt a small hope. The court was our last chance to bring out the truth. We entered the town at dusk, staying in the shadows. The satchel I carried was heavy, but it held important evidence. The courthouse stood at the end of Main Street, old but respected. Inside, the air was still but full of hope. Judge Allison was known for fairness and wisdom. When I showed him the evidence, letters, notes, and medical samples, took it seriously. "This is more than a mistake," he said quietly. The court session was fast but serious. Company lawyers came with confident smiles, but we had proof. Dr. Ward explained the miners' health problems and the company's actions. Clementine's reports and my own story showed the truth clearly. Weeks passed as the medical board joined the investigation. News spread quickly in the town and in newspapers. Silver Peak case. Company accused of wrongdoing. People were upset. They protested outside company offices. Families finally spoke out. Those who were ignored became voices for change. The company tried to stop us with threats and pressure, but we grew stronger. Carter, my friend, kept records and gathered support. Clementine's papers were published, revealing hidden problems. Dr. Ward helped coordinate with lawyers and health officials. Slowly, the truth came out. At last, the court gave its decision. Company leaders were charged, and the Silver Peak mines were closed. New rules were made to protect workers. Standing on the courthouse steps, hearing the crowd cheer, I felt tired but proud. My leg had healed, leaving a small scar, but the story was bigger than me. Justice was hard to get. It took courage and strength, but it came. As the sun set behind the mountains, I knew the fight wasn't over. But that day, truth won. The courtroom had emptied, the echoes of justice still ringing in my ears as I stepped out into the sharp sunlight. The weight of the past months felt both distant and immediate, like a wound finally closing but never quite forgotten. I ran a hand over the faint scar on my leg, a small mark left from the swelling that had threatened to destroy me. It was a reminder not just of what I endured, but of everything we uncovered together. The Silver Peak mines were sealed, the company's corrupt reign dismantled piece by piece. The men who had exploited workers for profit were behind bars, their smiles replaced with grim faces shadowed by the consequences of greed. Families of the miners, those who had been silenced by fear or bribery, finally had closure. Their tears, their gratitude were gifts I could never repay. Yet, beneath the satisfaction lay a quiet understanding. This victory was fragile. The forces of greed and cruelty never vanished. They only hid, waiting for the next opportunity to surface. But now, a powerful lesson had been carved into the territory's history that would resonate for generations. Clementine and Dr. Ward stood beside me as we walked away from the courthouse steps, the weight of their support as real as the late afternoon sun warming our backs. She looked at me, her eyes bright with unspoken questions about what came next. "We've done what we can here," I said. "But the fight to protect people, miners, workers, anyone at risk is just beginning." She nodded, her face set with determination. "Science and truth are weapons. We'll use them to keep shining a light where shadows grow." Dr. Ward's old voice broke in, rough but resolute. "And we'll make sure no one forgets what happened here. The victims deserve that much." The road back to my ranch felt different, now less lonely, less burdened. The cattle grazed quietly, the land breathing calm after years of hidden turmoil. The silver that once infected me now symbolized something else, a call to courage, a spark to expose darkness wherever it lurked. I thought back to the first time I noticed that swelling, how I'd ignored the pain, convinced it was just another hardship of life. But life, I learned, isn't just about enduring. It's about standing up, speaking out, and refusing to let injustice take root. Months passed, and with the company's downfall, new laws were passed. Mines became safer, workers had protections, and medical monitoring was mandatory. Clementine's research was published widely, becoming a cornerstone for occupational health. Boone Carter stayed by my side through it all. His rough wisdom and fierce loyalty grounded me. Together, we rebuilt not just the land, but the trust between neighbors and community. The scars, physical and emotional, were still there, but they no longer defined us. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, I stood on my porch watching the horizon. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of freedom and hard-won peace. The story of the silver in my leg was no longer just mine. It belonged to every miner who had suffered in silence, every family torn apart, every voice raised against greed. And as the stars began to prick the sky, I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me, but for all of us who choose courage over silence. Because in the end, it's not the darkness that wins. It's the light we carry, the truth we tell, and the courage to stand against the tide. The swelling that had once threatened to destroy me had become the spark that ignited change, and that was a legacy I would carry forever. If you were in his boots, would you have fought the same fight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your story. Don't forget to like the video and explore the other videos waiting for you on screen. Your next unforgettable journey is just a click away.